The scent of roasted venison was so thick in the air, I could almost taste it on my tongue. A cruel, phantom meal for a stomach that hadn't held solid food in 2 days. I pressed myself against the cold stone wall of the service corridor, clutching the heavy silver tray until my knuckles turned white. My head swam, a dizzying tilt that blurred the edges of my vision. "Steady," I whispered to myself, the word barely a breath. "Just 2 more hours, Elara. 2 more hours and the summit feast will be over. Then you can sleep. Move it." Runt. The sharp sting of a towel snapping against my arm made me flinch. I didn't look up. I knew better. It was Marcus, the beta in charge of the kitchen staff. He smelled of stale grease and unwashed hostility. "The high table is empty," Marcus snarled, shoving a heavy crystal decanter onto my already trembling tray. "If King Valerius's glass runs dry, I'll have your hide used as a rug by morning. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," I murmured, keeping my eyes fixed on his boots. "Then go. And try not to look so pathetic. You're ruining the appetite of the guests." I nodded, swallowing the bile that rose in my throat. I pushed off the wall, my legs feeling like they were stuffed with lead. Every step was a negotiation with gravity. My worn shoes, 3 sizes too big, shuffled against the polished marble as I pushed through the heavy oak doors and into the lion's den. The grand hall was a assault on the senses. If the kitchen was hot and chaotic, the hall was a freezing, glittering, terrified silence. Hundreds of candles floated above the long tables, casting a golden glow on the jewels and furs of the visiting alphas. The air rippled with power. It was suffocating. The sheer amount of alpha pheromones in the room, dominance, aggression, power, hit me like a physical wave. For an omega, especially a broken one like me with no wolf spirit to protect her, it was agony. It felt like walking through deep water. I kept my head down, my chin tucked to my chest. Invisible. Be invisible. That was the first rule of survival. If they don't see you, they can't hurt you. I moved along the perimeter of the room, my arms screaming under the weight of the wine. I poured for a visiting alpha from the southern pack. He didn't even acknowledge my presence, continuing his loud conversation as if the wine bottle was floating by itself. Good. That was good. But as I approached the high table, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, sharp, electric. The chatter that filled the rest of the hall died down to hushed whispers near the dais. Sitting at the center, on a chair that looked more like a throne of shadows than a seat, was him, Alpha King Valerius. I had never seen him up close. Stories about him were whispered in the slave quarters, like ghost stories. They said he was a monster. They said he had wiped out an entire rogue pack in a single night without shifting. They said his heart was made of obsidian. I didn't dare look at his face. As I approached his side of the table, all I saw were his hands. They were resting on the white tablecloth, large, powerful, still. A ring of black onyx sat on his finger. Unlike the other alphas who were gorging themselves on the feast, his plate was untouched. He was sitting with the lethal stillness of a predator, waiting for movement in the tall grass. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Just pour the wine. Don't spill. Don't breathe. I stepped forward, the silver tray shaking in my grip. I reached for his goblet. That's when the smell hit me. It wasn't the smell of food. It wasn't the cloying perfume of the female shifters trying to catch his attention. It was the scent of a thunderstorm about to break. It was ozone and wet earth and deep, ancient cedar wood. It was the most intoxicating, terrifying thing I had ever smelled. My wolf, usually dormant and silent deep within me, suddenly stirred. She whimpered. Danger, my mind screamed. Safety, my soul whispered. The contradiction made my knees buckle. Easy, I gasped, the room tilting violently to the left. I tried to steady myself, but the exhaustion I had been fighting all day finally collected its debt. The black spots in my vision expanded, eating up the candlelight. The heavy crystal decanter slipped from my sweaty fingers. No, time seemed to slow down. I watched in horror as the decanter tipped. Red wine, expensive, dark, like blood arced through the air. It splashed across the pristine white tablecloth. It splashed onto the king's hand. The sound of the crystal shattering against the marble floor echoed like a gunshot in the silent hall. Every conversation stopped. Every fork froze. The silence was absolute. I stood there, swaying, my face drained of blood. I had just spilled wine on the Alpha King. This wasn't a mistake. It was a death sentence. Marcus was right. I wouldn't live to see the sunrise. My voice was a dry croak. I tried to bow, to beg for mercy, to drop to my knees in submission, but my body gave up. The floor rushed up to meet me. The darkness swallowed the room completely. I waited for the impact. I waited for the pain of my bones hitting the stone. It never came. Instead of cold marble, I landed against something hard and warm, something solid. Strong arms wrapped around me, stopping my fall inches from the ground. A hand, large and calloused, gripped my waist with possessive strength. The scent of cedar and storm clouds enveloped me, drowning out the smell of the spilled wine. It was so strong, so overwhelming, that for a second, it cleared the fog in my mind. I forced my heavy eyelids to flutter open. I wasn't looking at the floor. I was looking up, directly into eyes the color of molten gold. King Valerius had caught me. He wasn't looking at the mess. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking down at me, his face inches from mine. His expression wasn't angry. It was shocked. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the gold iris until his eyes were nearly black. His nostrils flared, inhaling sharply near my neck. Mine. A deep rumble vibrated through his chest, directly into my spine. It wasn't a question. It was a growl. I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to apologize. But the gray fog rolled back in, heavier this time. My head lulled back against his arm. As my consciousness faded, the last thing I felt was his hand moving. His fingers brushed against the sleeve of my tattered dress, accidentally pulling the fabric down. The cool air hit my shoulder. And then I heard the roar. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated fury that shattered the windows of the grand hall. Who did this? The king's voice shook the foundations of the castle. And then, everything went black. The roar didn't just hurt my ears. It rattled my bones. It was a sound so deep, so primal, that it vibrated through the floorboards and up into the body that I was no longer in control of. I was floating in a dark, gray ocean. Pain was a distant thing now, a dull throb somewhere far away. But the heat was immediate. I was pressed against a furnace, hard, unyielding, and scorching hot. "Don't you dare close your eyes again," a voice growled. It sounded like rocks grinding together deep underground. "Open them." I tried to obey. The command in that voice wasn't something an Omega could resist. It pulled at my navel, a physical hook dragging me back to the waking world. My eyelids fluttered. The blinding light of the chandeliers assaulted me again, forcing a whimper from my throat. "She's waking up," the deep voice said, softer this time. My vision cleared, just for a second. The first thing I saw was the ceiling painted with frescoes of ancient wolf wars. Then, I saw him, King Valerius. He was still holding me. He hadn't dropped me. He hadn't recoiled in disgust at the wine staining his expensive ceremonial tunic. Instead, he had pulled me closer, cradling me against his chest as if I weighed nothing more than a feather. But his face was a mask of terrifying violence. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at my arm. The sleeve of my uniform, a rough, scratchy gray wool, had torn when I fell. It had slid down past my elbow, exposing skin that I had fought desperately to keep hidden. In the harsh light of the grand hall, there were no secrets. I followed his gaze, and shame flooded my system, colder than the ice water. There were 3 fresh welts on my forearm, angry, red, and raised. Marcus had been in a foul mood this morning because the bread hadn't risen. He had used the riding crop. He always used the crop when he didn't want to leave lasting damage on the face, where the guests might see. Just on the arms, Marcus had laughed. You use your hands to serve, Alara. Keep them covered, and no one cares. But King Valerius cared. His hand, large enough to crush my skull, hovered over the welts. He didn't touch them. He looked afraid that if he touched them, his own heat would burn me further. Who? The single word fell from his lips like a guillotine blade. The silence in the grand hall was absolute. 300 of the most powerful shifters in the world were holding their breath. I could smell their fear. It smelled like sour milk. I asked a question, Valerius said, his voice rising, carrying a layer of alpha command that made the glass in the windows tremble. Who did this? This. I tried to shrink away, to hide my arm, but his grip on my waist tightened. Not to hurt, but to anchor. Then, his eyes shifted. They moved past the ugly red welts, up toward my shoulder. I froze. No. Please, moon goddess. Not that. Anything but that. There, just below my collarbone, was the mark I had covered with mud and ash since I was a child. A birthmark, a perfect golden crescent moon, intertwined with a silver star. The mark of a high priestess. The mark of a true queen. The mud must have washed away when I sweat through my fever earlier today. It was exposed, glowing faintly against my pale skin. Valerius stopped breathing. His pupils dilated until the gold was completely swallowed by black. The scent of ozone and cedar exploded from him, rolling off his body in thick, suffocating waves. It was the scent of a mate, recognizing his other half. Impossible, he whispered, his voice trembling with an emotion I couldn't name. He reached out. His index finger, calloused and rough, traced the outline of the golden crescent on my skin. A spark, literal, visible blue electricity snapped between us. My back arched off his arm. The pleasure was agonizing. It wasn't pain. It was a feeling of being found. A key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 20 years. Mate? He breathed. The word was a prayer. Then, the reality of the situation crashed into him. He was holding his fated mate, his queen, and she was starving. She was covered in filth, and she had been beaten. The shift in the room was instantaneous. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a heartbeat. The candles flickered and died, leaving us in shadows. Valerius looked up from my arm. He looked out at the sea of terrified faces. "Lock the doors," he commanded. The guards at the main entrance slammed the heavy oak doors shut. The boom echoed like thunder. "Your Majesty," a trembling voice called out from the crowd. It was Alpha Grayson, from the Eastern Territories. "Surely there is a misunderstanding. That is a servant, an Omega. You cannot possibly—" Silence. Valerius didn't shout. He roared. His canines elongated, snapping down over his bottom lip. His eyes glowed with a feral, violet light. "You speak of my queen," he snarled, the sound ripping through the air. "And you stand in a room where she was starved, where she was beaten." He stood up, lifting me effortlessly into his arms, bridal style. My head lolled against his shoulder. I was fading again, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving only the crushing exhaustion. "No one leaves this hall," Valerius announced to the darkness. "My beta will interview every single one of you. If I find out that any of you knew, if I find out that any of you watched her suffer and did nothing." He looked down at me, and the violet rage in his eyes softened into a pool of liquid gold. "I will burn your packs to ash." He turned on his heel, ignoring the gasps and the whispers, and strode toward the private exit behind the dais. I should have been terrified. I was being carried away by the most dangerous predator on the continent. I was being taken to the royal wing, a place where servants were forbidden to tread on pain of death. But as my cheek rested against the rough fabric of his tunic, listening to the thunderous beat of his heart, thump, 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 it was beating in rhythm with mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't cold. I wasn't invisible. I closed my eyes, and the darkness took me again. But this time, the darkness didn't smell like fear. It smelled like cedar. It smelled like rain. It smelled like home. Waking up felt like floating to the surface of a warm, thick syrup. Usually, waking up was a violent affair. It meant the screech of the rooster at dawn, the freezing cold of the drafty attic, and the ache in my bones from sleeping on a mattress stuffed with old straw. But this was different. My cheek was pressed against something impossibly soft. It smelled of lavender and sun-dried cotton. I shifted my weight, expecting the sharp dig of a bed spring into my hip. Instead, I sank deeper. It felt like I was sleeping on a cloud. I blinked my eyes open, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't the rotting wooden beams of the servants' quarters. It was plaster, painted a soft cream, with crown molding etched in gold leaf. A chandelier, small but made of real crystal, hung from the center, catching the morning light. Morning light? Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the comfort. I sat up, gasping. The movement made the room spin, and I clutched my head. "I overslept," I whispered, my voice raspy. "Marcus is going to kill me." If the sun was up, breakfast service had already started. The porridge needed to be stirred. The fires needed to be stoked. If I wasn't there, I scrambled to get out of the bed, throwing the heavy duvet aside. That's when I froze. I wasn't wearing my scratchy gray wool dress. I was wearing silk. A nightgown, white and flowing, made of material so fine it felt like water against my skin. It had long sleeves that covered my arms, ending in delicate lace cuffs. Where? I looked around the room. It was larger than the entire kitchen. A fireplace crackled in the corner, feeding warmth into the air. A vanity table made of dark mahogany stood against the wall, covered in glass bottles and silver brushes. This wasn't a guest room. This was a royal suite. The memories of last night crashed into me like a falling wall. The grand hall, the smell of cedar, the spilled wine, the king's eyes black and terrifying, the roar. Mine. My hand flew to my mouth. "I didn't dream it," I breathed, horror washing over me. "I spilled wine on the Alpha King, and he took me. Why? To punish me? Was this the final meal before the execution?" Servants whispered about the royal dungeons, but this room looked nothing like a dungeon. It looked like a cage, a very, very expensive cage. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, My feet sank into a plush rug. I needed to leave. I needed to find Marcus, apologize, beg for my job back, and pray the king had forgotten about the clumsy servant girl by now. Maybe if I disappeared back into the kitchens, he wouldn't bother hunting me down. I took a step toward the heavy double doors. My legs, still weak from hunger, trembled. I grabbed the bedpost to steady myself. As I did, the sleeve of the silk nightgown slid up. I looked down at my arm. The angry red welts from Marcus's crop were gone. In their place was a smooth, shiny layer of silver salve. It smelled medicinal, like peppermint and aloe. Someone had treated my wounds while I slept. Why would they heal me if they're going to kill me? Before I could process the thought, the heavy brass handle on the double doors turned. Click. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the headboard of the massive bed, pulling the duvet up to my chin. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The door opened. It wasn't a guard. It wasn't Marcus. It was him. King Valerius filled the doorway. Without his ceremonial armor and heavy fur cloak, he looked even bigger. He was wearing a simple black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He was holding a silver tray. He stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him with his foot. He turned, and his golden eyes locked onto me instantly. For a second, he looked relieved. Then, his gaze dropped to my hands, clutching the blanket in a death grip. He saw the fear. His jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. "You're awake," he said. His voice was deep, rumbling through the quiet room, but he kept it low, gentle, like one might speak to a startled deer. Your Majesty," I squeaked. I tried to scramble out of the bed to bow, to kneel, to do something respectful. "Stay," he commanded. It wasn't a shout, but the alpha command was woven into the single syllable. My body obeyed before my brain could argue. My muscles locked, keeping me seated on the mattress. He walked toward the bed. Every step he took was silent, a predator stalking his prey. But there was no aggression in his scent today, just concern, and that overwhelming smell of cedarwood that made my head spin. He set the tray down on the bedside table. The smell of food wafted over me. Fresh bread, hot broth, roasted chicken. My stomach let out a treacherous, loud growl. Valerius's lips twitched. A ghost of a smile? Or was he mocking me? "Eat," he said, gesturing to the tray. I stared at the food. Then I looked up at him, my eyes wide. Is it poisoned?" I whispered. The question slipped out before I could stop it. Valerius flinched. Actual pain flashed across his features, gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a stony mask. "No, little one," he said softly. "It is not poisoned. I prepared it myself." My jaw dropped. The Alpha King? Cooking? Why? I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm just a servant. I ruined your tunic. I broke a crystal decanter worth more than my life." Valerius sighed. He sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. He was so close now. The heat radiating from his body was intoxicating. He reached out. I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut, waiting for the blow. But it didn't come. Instead, warm, rough fingers brushed a stray lock of hair away from my forehead. His touch was terrifyingly gentle. "You are not just a servant," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "And I do not care about the tunic." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated in my bones. "Show me your shoulder, Alara." I froze. He knew my name. My shoulder? "The mark," he said, his eyes darkening. the gold swirling with intensity. "Let me see it." I shook my head, clutching the nightgown tighter. "It's just a birthmark, Your Majesty. It's ugly. It is the reason I am not currently tearing this castle apart to find the man who hurt you," he interrupted, his voice hardening slightly. "Show me." Slowly, with trembling fingers, I lowered the shoulder of the silk gown. The golden crescent moon and silver star were there, stark against my pale skin. Valerius stared at it. He didn't touch it this time. He just looked at it with a reverence that terrified me. "Do you know what this means?" he asked, his gaze lifting to meet mine. "It means I'm cursed," I whispered, repeating the words Marcus had told me for years. "It means I'm a freak," Valerius growled, a low, vibrating sound that came from deep in his chest. "No," he said fiercely. "It means you are mine." He picked up the bowl of broth from the tray and held a spoon to my lips. "Eat," he ordered softly. "You will need your strength, because I am never letting you go back to that kitchen again." I opened my mouth and took the first bite. It tasted like salvation. The spoon clicked softly against the porcelain bowl. It was the only sound in the massive room, louder to my ears than a shout. King Valerius fed me with a patience that was unnerving. He didn't rush. He didn't look annoyed. He waited for me to swallow every sip of the rich, golden broth before offering the next. The warmth of the soup spread through my chest, chasing away the deep, aching chill that had lived in my bones for years. But it didn't chase away the fear. Every time his hand moved near my face, my heart stuttered. I expected a slap. I expected him to grab my chin and force my head up, but his movements remained steady, controlled, like he was handling a piece of spun glass that had already been cracked. "Enough?" he asked quietly, setting the bowl aside on the nightstand. I nodded, clutching the silk sheets to my chest. "Thank you, Your Majesty." It was the best meal I've ever had. It was the only meal I'd had in days that wasn't stale bread or potato peelings, but I didn't say that. Valerius watched me. His golden eyes were intense, analyzing every micro-expression on my face. It felt like he was reading a book written in a language only he understood. "Tell me about the mark, Alara," he said. The air in the room grew heavy again. I instinctively covered my shoulder with my hand, hiding the golden crescent beneath the silk of the nightgown. "I told you," I whispered, looking down at my lap. "It's a curse. My mother, she died when I was born. The midwife said the moon goddess marked me for bad luck. That's why I have no wolf. That's why I'm defective." "Defective," Valerius repeated the word. It sounded like gravel crunching under heavy boots. "Is that what they told you?" "It's the truth," I insisted, my voice trembling. "I can't shift. I can't smell scents like you can. I'm useless to a pack. That's why I was sold to the kitchens." Valerius reached out. He took my hand, the one covering my shoulder, and gently but firmly pulled it away. He didn't let go. His thumb rubbed circles into my palm, sending sparks of heat traveling up my arm. "You are not scentless, Alara," he said, his voice low and rough. "You smell like the air before a storm. You smell like the first snow of winter. You smell." He paused, inhaling deeply, his eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second. "Intoxicating." I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. "But no one else has ever." "Because they are not strong enough to sense it," he said, his eyes snapping open. "And you have no wolf because your spirit is not divided. You do not share your soul with a beast, Alara. You are something older." He leaned forward, his face inches from mine. I could see the flecks of amber in his irises. "That mark is not a curse. It is the sigil of the crescent. In the ancient texts, it marks a healer, a seer, a true queen. "I'm just a servant," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "Please, don't mock me. I know what I am." "And I know what I am," Valerius growled softly. "I am the Alpha King. I have lived for 300 years. I have ruled 7 kingdoms. I have searched every corner of this continent for the one soul that matches mine." He brought my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles. The sensation sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "I stopped searching yesterday," he murmured against my skin. "When I caught you," my breath hitched. "You mean mate?" he confirmed. "You are my mate, Alara." The world seemed to stop spinning. A mate? Me, the invisible runt, mated to the most powerful creature in existence? It must be a mistake," I stammered, pulling my hand back. "The goddess wouldn't. She wouldn't pair you with me. Look at me. I'm weak. I'm broken. I have nothing to offer you." Valerius's expression darkened. The tenderness vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp rage. But I realized, with a start, that the rage wasn't directed at me. "Who broke you?" he asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. I went still. "Who put those welts on your arm, Alara?" he pressed, his voice dropping an octave. "Who told you that you were defective? Who starved you until you fainted in my arms?" I shook my head. I can't say." "Name him," Valerius commanded. The alpha tone rippled through the room, making the window panes rattle. "Give me a name, and I will bring you his head." "No," I gasped, terrified. "You don't understand. He owns me. He has the contract. If I speak against him, the law says—" "I am the law," Valerius roared, standing up abruptly. I flinched. Curling into a ball, Valerius froze. Seeing my fear, he took a deep breath, visibly reining in his wolf. He ran a hand through his dark hair, pacing away from the bed to put distance between us. "I am sorry," he said, his back to me. "I did not mean to frighten you. But you must understand. Seeing you like this, knowing someone hurt what belongs to me." He turned back, his face a mask of deadly determination. "You are safe here, Alara. No one can touch you in the royal wing. Not Marcus, not your owner, not even the gods themselves. Knock, knock, knock." The sharp sound at the door shattered the promise immediately. Valerius turned toward the door, his posture shifting instantly from concerned lover to lethal warrior. "Enter," he barked. The heavy door opened, and the captain of the guard stepped in. He looked pale. He wouldn't look at me. "Your Majesty," the captain said, bowing low. "Forgive the intrusion." "Speak," Valerius snapped. "There is a situation in the receiving room." The captain swallowed hard. "Beta Marcus of the Silver River Pack is here. He has the employment contract, he says." The captain paused, glancing nervously at the king. "He says you have stolen his property. He is demanding the return of the servant girl immediately." I stopped breathing. Marcus was here. He had come for me. Valerius didn't move. He didn't blink. But the temperature in the room plummeted until I could see my own breath in the air. A dark, cruel smile spread across the Alpha King's face. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a monster who had just been given permission to hunt. "He is demanding, is he?" Valerius said, his voice soft and terrifying. "Yes, sire." "Good," Valerius whispered. "Let him in." The sound of heavy boots on the marble floor was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. Clomp, clomp, clomp. It was the sound of dread. The sound of 4 a.m. wake-up calls. The sound of pain approaching. I scrambled backward on the massive bed. pressing my spine against the headboard until I couldn't go any further. I pulled the silk duvet up to my nose, as if a layer of fabric could protect me from what was walking through that door. "Illyra," Valeria said. He didn't turn to look at me. He was facing the door, standing like a statue carved from black marble. "Do not move. Do not speak. Just breathe." The captain of the guard stepped aside, and Marcus walked in. He looked agonizingly out of place in the royal suite. He was wearing his kitchen whites, stained with grease spots, and he smelled like he always did, like stale, frying oil, cheap tobacco, and cruelty. He didn't look at the king. He looked straight at me. His eyes narrowed into slits. His lip curled up, revealing yellowed teeth. "There you are," he sneered, ignoring the Alpha King standing 3 feet away from him. "I've been looking everywhere for you, you useless little rat." I flinched so hard my head hit the headboard. I'm sorry, Marcus. I didn't mean to." "Silence," Marcus barked. He took a step toward the bed, reaching into his pocket. "Do you have any idea the trouble you've caused? Spilling wine on the high table? Breaking crystal? I'm going to take the cost of that decanter out of your hide, strip by strip." He pulled out a coiled length of leather. The crop, my breath hitched in my throat. My body remembered the bite of that leather better than it remembered my mother's face. Marcus took another step. That was his mistake. Valerius moved. It wasn't a run. It was a blur. 1 second he was standing by the window. The next, he was a wall of muscle between me and the beta. "That," Valerius said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "is close enough." Marcus stopped, looking annoyed rather than afraid. He was a fool. He was so used to bullying omegas and runts that he had forgotten how to fear a true alpha. "With all due respect, Your Majesty," Marcus said, his tone dripping with false politeness. "This is a domestic matter. That girl is property of the Silver River Pack Kitchens. She is under contract." He waved a crumpled piece of parchment in the air. "I have the papers right here, signed by her father before he died to pay off his debts. She belongs to me until the debt is paid." Marcus smirked, tapping the paper. "And by my calculation, with the cost of the wine she wasted last night, she'll be working for me until she's 80. So, if you'll step aside, I'll collect my property and get out of your hair." I watched Valerius's back. The muscles in his shoulders were bunching under his black shirt, tight cords of tension that looked ready to snap. "Property," Valerius repeated. The word sounded like poison in his mouth. "That's right," Marcus said, stepping sideways to try and get a look at me again. "Come on, Illyra, get up. Don't make me drag you." "Stay," Valerius commanded. The air in the room suddenly grew heavy. Physically heavy. It felt like the atmospheric pressure had dropped deep underwater. The curtains by the window stopped fluttering. The dust motes in the sunbeams froze. Valerius turned his head slowly to look at Marcus. I couldn't see the king's face, but I saw Marcus's reaction. The beta's smirk faltered. He took a half step back, the color draining from his ruddy face. The smell of stale grease was suddenly overpowered by the sharp, acidic scent of fear. "You call her property," Valerius whispered. He took a step toward Marcus. "You call her a rat. It's just a figure of speech." "Your Majesty," Marcus stammered, his arrogance cracking. "She's clumsy. She's mute half the time. She's broken." "Broken." The word echoed in the silence. Valerius stopped. He tilted his head. "Broken?" "Yes," Marcus said, gaining a little confidence back. "She's defective, barren, scentless. You can't even smell her, can you? She's worthless to a pack. I'm doing her a favor by keeping her fed." I squeezed my eyes shut. "Please, stop talking. Please, Marcus, just stop." "Scentless," Valerius murmured. A low, vibrating sound started in his chest. A growl. It was loud enough that the glass perfume bottles on the vanity table started to rattle. Clink, clink, clink. You say she is scentless, Valerius continued, taking another step. Marcus backed up until he hit the wall. Yet I can smell her fear from across the room. I can smell her sorrow. Valerius leaned in, towering over the smaller man, and I can smell your scent on her skin. Valerius's hand shot out. He didn't strike Marcus. He grabbed the parchment contract from his hand. He didn't tear it. He simply squeezed his fist. Blue flames alpha magic erupted from his palm. The paper turned to ash in a second, drifting down to the pristine carpet. The contract is void, Valerius said. You can't do that, Marcus squeaked, his voice pitching high with panic. That's illegal. The council will hear of this. You can't just steal a servant because you fancy her. I am not stealing a servant, Valerius said. The air pressure in the room spiked. Crack. A spiderweb fracture appeared on the glass of the balcony doors. I am reclaiming my queen. Marcus's eyes bugged out of his head. Q-Queen? Her? The runt? He laughed. A nervous, disbelief-filled sound. You're joking. She's a nobody. Look at her. Marcus pointed a shaking finger at me. She's covered in scars. Valerius moved faster than my eyes could track. His hand wrapped around Marcus's throat, lifting the beta 6 inches off the floor. Those scars, Valerius snarled, his voice no longer human, distorted by the wolf rising to the surface. You put them there. Marcus clawed at the king's hand, his legs kicking uselessly. He made a choking, gurgling sound. Please, I whispered from the bed. Valerius froze. He didn't drop Marcus, but he turned his head slightly toward me. His eyes were pitch black. No gold left, just the void. Please? He asked me, his voice rough. You want me to spare him? After what he did to you? No, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. I sat up, letting the duvet fall to my waist. I pointed at the choking man who had tormented me for 5 years. I don't want you to spare him. I looked Valerius in the eye. I just don't want you to kill him in here. It will stain the rug. Valerius stared at me. For a second, the tension was unbearable. Then, the corner of his mouth lifted. A dark, vicious grin. As my queen commands, he turned back to Marcus, whose face was turning purple. You heard her, Valerius whispered to the dying man. Not in here. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he threw Marcus. Not out the door, through the closed window. Crash. The glass shattered outward. Marcus screamed as he flew out onto the stone balcony, landing with a heavy thud and the sound of something snapping. Valerius dusted off his hands. He didn't even look out the window to see if the man was alive. He turned back to me, the monster fading back beneath the skin, the golden eyes returning. Better? He asked. I looked at the shattered window, letting the cold wind blow into the room. It smelled fresh. It smelled clean. Much better, I whispered. The wind howled through the shattered window, carrying the scent of snow and pine into the warm bedroom. It ruffled the silk curtains, making them dance like ghosts. But the most distinct smell wasn't the winter air. It was the metallic tang of blood. Valerius stood by the broken frame, staring out onto the stone balcony. His back was to me, broad and heaving slightly with each breath. The black shirt stretched tight across his shoulders. He looked like a statue of vengeance carved by a mad sculptor. From outside, a pathetic, wet sound drifted in. A whimper. My leg. Ah, gods. My leg. Marcus was alive. Broken, but alive. I should have felt pity. I was raised to be soft, to be a healer, to hate violence. But as I sat there, clutching the silk sheets to my chest, staring at the man who had just thrown my abuser through a pane of double-paned glass, I didn't feel pity. I felt safe. For the first time in 5 years, the monster wasn't under my bed. The monster was standing between me and the door, and he was on my side. Valerius stepped through the broken glass, his boots crunching on the shards. "Stay here, Alara," he commanded, his voice low. "Don't look." He walked out onto the balcony. I didn't obey. I couldn't. I needed to see it. I needed to know it was real. I crept off the bed, my bare feet silent on the plush rug. I moved to the side of the window, pressing myself against the wall so I could peek out without being seen. Marcus was crawling across the stone. His left leg was twisted at a sickening angle. His face was a mask of blood and snot. When he saw the Alpha King towering over him, he stopped crawling and started sobbing. "Please, Your Majesty, mercy," Marcus blubbered, holding up his hands. "I was just doing my job. The law, the contract." "You still speak of contracts?" Valerius asked. The king didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. He just let go. I felt it before I saw it. The air pressure dropped so low my ears popped. The hair on my arms stood up. Ozone. The smell of lightning striking dry earth. Valerius opened his hand, and shadows, literal, inky black shadows, began to bleed out of his skin. They swirled around him like a cloak, blocking out the sun. This was the power of the Shadow King, the power that had ended wars. "You struck her," Valerius whispered. He took a step. Crunch. Marcus screamed as Valerius stepped on his uninjured hand. "You starved her." Another step. "You made her believe she was worthless." Valerius reached down and grabbed Marcus by the collar of his greasy tunic. He lifted the beta off the ground until his feet dangled over the edge of the balcony railing. Below them was a 300-foot drop to the rocky cliffs of the jagged coast. "No! No! I beg you!" Marcus shrieked, his legs flailing. "I won't touch her again. I swear. I'll leave the territory. "You are right," Valerius said, his eyes glowing with that terrifying violet light. "You won't touch her again." The shadows swirled around Marcus, binding him tighter than any rope. "And you won't leave the territory. You will face the council. You will tell them every crime you committed against this pack's queen. And then," Valerius leaned in close, his voice a death knell, "I will let her decide your fate." Valerius turned and threw Marcus back onto the balcony floor hard. The beta scrambled back, sobbing, curling into a ball of misery. "Guards!" Valerius roared. The bedroom door burst open behind me. The captain and 2 soldiers rushed in, weapons drawn. They froze when they saw me standing by the window in my nightgown. "Your Majesty," the captain asked, looking past me to the balcony. "Take this trash to the deepest cell," Valerius commanded without looking back. "If he dies before I get down there, I will take it as a personal insult." The guards didn't hesitate. They rushed past me, careful not to make eye contact, and dragged the weeping Marcus away. As they hauled him out, Marcus looked at me one last time. There was no arrogance left in his eyes, only terror. And then he was gone. The room fell silent. The wind whistled through the broken glass. Valerius stood alone on the balcony for a long moment, staring out at the horizon, his chest heaving as he fought to leash the wolf back inside. Then he turned around. He saw me standing there, barefoot, shivering in the cold draft. The darkness in his eyes vanished instantly. "Ilara," he breathed. He stepped back into the room, ignoring the glass crunching under his boots. He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides. He fell to his knees. The Alpha King, the ruler of the 7 territories, the Shadow Walker, fell to his knees in front of a servant girl. He reached for my hands. His knuckles were split and bloody from where he had punched the wall earlier, or maybe from gripping Marcus too hard. "I told you not to look," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I had to," I answered, my thumbs brushing over his bruised knuckles. The contact sent warmth flooding through both of us. I had to know he couldn't hurt me anymore. Valerius pressed his forehead against my stomach, wrapping his arms around my waist. He buried his face in the silk of my nightgown, inhaling my scent like it was oxygen. "I lost control," he confessed, his voice muffled against me. "I almost killed him right there. I wanted to tear him apart for touching you." I rested my hand on his dark, messy hair. It was soft. "Why didn't you?" I asked softly. He looked up at me. His golden eyes were wet. "Because you asked me not to stain the rug." A small, watery laugh escaped my lips. "You are safe, Elara," he swore, squeezing me tighter. "I will burn the world before I let them touch you again." I looked down at him, at the monster who had become my savior, and for the first time in my life, I believed him. "I know," I whispered. The adrenaline was fading, and in its wake, the cold returned with a vengeance. The window was still shattered, jagged teeth of glass biting into the winter air. I shivered, a violent tremor that started in my shoulders and rattled my teeth. Valerius felt it immediately. He stood up from where he had been kneeling, his expression shifting from rage back to that intense, overwhelming protectiveness. "You're freezing," he muttered. He looked at the broken window with disdain, then swept me up into his arms again. "I can walk," I protested weakly, though I instinctively curled into his warmth. "I'm not an invalid. You are barefoot in a room full of glass," he corrected, striding toward the other side of the suite. "And you are shaking." He carried me not back to the bed, but to a set of double doors I hadn't noticed before. He kicked them open. Steam billowed out, carrying the scent of jasmine and heavy, humid heat. It was the bathroom, but calling it a bathroom felt like an insult. It was a sanctuary of black marble and gold fixtures. In the center, sunk deep into the floor, was a tub large enough to swim in. The water was already running, steaming hot. "I ordered the maids to prepare it while you were sleeping," Valerius explained, setting me down on a velvet bench near the edge. "I thought you might want to wash away the memory of that place." I looked at the water. It was milky white, swirling with rose petals. In the kitchens, washing meant a bucket of ice-cold well water and a bar of lye soap that stripped your skin raw. This looked like magic. "I can't," I whispered, looking down at my hands. They were still stained with soot from the ovens and dirt from the floor. "I'll dirty the water." Valerius went still. He knelt before me again, taking my dirty hands in his. "Then let it be dirty," he said fiercely. "Water can be replaced. You cannot." He reached for the hem of the silk nightgown. He paused, his golden eyes meeting mine, asking for permission without speaking a word. I nodded, my breath hitching. He lifted the gown over my head, tossing it aside. I sat there, naked and vulnerable, covered in old scars, fresh bruises, and grime. I wanted to hide. I wanted to curl up and disappear. But Valerius didn't look away. He didn't look at my body with lust, though the heat in his eyes was undeniable. He looked at me with worship. "Beautiful," he breathed. He helped me into the water. The heat was a shock, stinging my skin for a moment before settling into a deep, bone-melting comfort. I groaned, sinking up to my chin. The jasmine scent filled my nose, drowning out the lingering smell of Marcus's fear. I expected Valerius to leave, to call a handmaiden to scrub me. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves further. He grabbed a sea sponge and a bar of soap that smelled of honey. "May I?" he asked. You're the king," I stammered, splashing a little water in my nervousness. "You don't wash servants." "I am washing my mate," he corrected. He moved behind me. The sponge touched my back, squeezed full of warm, soapy water. I tensed, waiting for it to hurt. Marcus used to scrub us with wire brushes if we weren't clean enough. But Valerius was gentle, agonizingly gentle. He moved the sponge in slow, circular motions, washing away the grime of the kitchens. He paid special attention to my shoulder, where the golden crescent mark glowed under the water. Why me? The question slipped out into the humid air, quiet and small. Valerius paused, his hand resting on the nape of my neck. "Why you what?" "Why me?" I repeated, turning slightly to look at him. "There are thousands of she-wolves in your kingdom. Beautiful ones, strong ones, high-born alphas who know how to rule. I'm nobody. I have no wolf. I can't even shift." Valerius dropped the sponge. He framed my wet face with his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheekbones. "Do you really not know what you are?" he asked softly. "I'm a servant." "No," he said firmly. "You are a lunar omega." The words meant nothing to me. "A lunar?" "Centuries ago," Valerius began, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. "The moon goddess didn't just create wolves. She created bridges. She created souls that were pure magic, unburdened by the animal instinct of the shift." He traced the water droplets running down my neck. They were the healers, the peacekeepers. Their scent alone could calm a feral alpha. Their touch could heal wounds that magic couldn't reach. They were the most consistent, powerful creatures in our world. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. But they were rare. And because they were gentle, they were hunted. We thought they were extinct, Ilara. We thought the bloodline died out 1,000 years ago. He pulled back to look me in the eye. "You have no wolf, because you are the magic. You are the moon's favorite daughter." I stared at him, the water suddenly feeling very hot. "And you?" I whispered. "What are you to a lunar omega?" Valerius smiled. It was a small, sad, beautiful thing. "Me?" he chuckled darkly. "I am just the dog that guards the treasure." He leaned down and kissed my forehead. "And God help anyone who tries to steal it from me again." He stood up, grabbing a thick, fluffy towel from the rack. "Come," he said, holding it open for me. "The council is waiting, and it is time they met their queen." The dress weighed more than I did. It was made of deep, midnight blue velvet, embroidered with silver thread that shimmered like starlight under the lamps. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a skirt so full it rustled with a sound like dry leaves every time I took a breath. I stood in front of the tall mirror in the dressing room, staring at the stranger, reflecting back at me. The maids had brushed my hair until it shone like spun gold. They had painted my lips a soft rose. They had hidden the bruises on my arms beneath the velvet. I looked like a queen, but inside, I was shaking like a leaf in a storm. "I can't do this," I whispered to the reflection. "I'm a kitchen maid. I know how to peel potatoes, not how to rule a kingdom." "You are not a maid," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Valerius walked in. He had changed, too. He was wearing his formal ceremonial armor, black leather and silver plate, with a heavy fur cloak draped over his broad shoulders. He looked terrifying. He looked magnificent. He stood behind me, his dark eyes meeting mine in the mirror. He placed his hands on my shoulders, his warmth seeping through the heavy velvet. "You are Ilara," he said firmly. My mate. And tonight, you take your place. They're going to hate me, I confessed, my voice trembling. The council, the elders, they expect you to mate with a warrior, an alpha female from a powerful bloodline, not a scentless runt. Valerius leaned down, his lips brushing my ear. Let them hate, he growled softly. But they will kneel. He offered me his arm. Ready? I took a deep breath, inhaling his scent of cedar and storm. It grounded me. No, I admitted. I took his arm anyway. Let's go. The walk to the throne room felt like a march to the gallows. Every step echoed on the marble. The guards at the massive double doors bowed low as we approached, but I saw the flicker of confusion in their eyes. Why is the king escorting the kitchen girl? Valerius nodded to the guards. Boom. The doors swung open. The sound hit me first. A wall of noise, hundreds of voices talking, arguing, laughing. Then, the announcer's staff struck the floor. All rise for King Valerius of the Shadow Pack. And the announcer hesitated. He looked at the paper in his hand, then at me, then back at the king. He swallowed hard. And his lady. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. We stepped into the room. Thousands of eyes locked onto me. I could smell their judgment. It smelled sharp, like vinegar and ozone. I felt the waves of confusion and disdain rolling off the crowd. Who is she? Isn't that the servant who spilled the wine? Why is she wearing royal colors? Valerius didn't look left or right. He walked straight down the center aisle toward the dais, pulling me along with him. His grip on my arm was iron tight, a silent message to the room. She is mine. Touch her and die. We reached the foot of the throne. Standing there, waiting for us, were the 12 elders. They were old wolves, their hair silver, their faces lined with centuries of war and politics. In the center stood Elder Vance. I knew him by reputation. He was a traditionalist. He believed omegas should be seen and not heard, and preferably not seen at all. Vance looked at Valerius. Then he looked at me. His lip curled in a sneer that mirrored Marcus's. Your Majesty, Vance said, his voice dry as dust. We were told there was an emergency, a matter of state security. Instead, we find you playing dress-up with the help. A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the crowd. Valerius stiffened. Careful, Vance. Careful? Vance stepped forward. You arrest a beta from a visiting pack. You throw him in a dungeon without trial. And for what? Because he disciplined his own property? Vance pointed a gnarled finger at me. She is a runt, Valerius. Look at her. She has no wolf. She has no scent. She is a genetic dead end. And you parade her in here wearing the royal blue? She is my mate, Valerius stated. The room gasped. Vance didn't gasp. He laughed. Your mate? Impossible. The moon goddess does not make mistakes. She would not pair the alpha of alphas with a broken vessel. Vance took another step closer, his eyes hard. She is barren, Valerius. Look at her hips. Look at her aura. She carries no life. If you mate with her, the royal line ends with you. You will doom this kingdom for a pretty face. The accusation hung in the air. Barren. Doom. I felt the tears pricking my eyes. He was right. That's what everyone had always said. I was broken. Valerius released my arm. He took a step toward Vance, his hand reaching for the hilt of his sword. I warned you. No. The word came from my own throat. It was quiet, but it stopped Valerius cold. I stepped forward. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the dress. Maybe it was the lingering warmth of the bath. Or maybe I was just tired of being afraid. I walked past Valerius. I stood toe to toe with Elder Vance. "I am not broken," I whispered. Vance looked down at me with pity. "Go back to the kitchen, girl, before you get hurt," I said. I raised my voice, surprising even myself. "I am not broken." Something started to hum in my chest. A vibration, a heat. It started at my shoulder, right where the birthmark lay, hidden beneath the velvet. "You call me scentless," I said, my voice gaining strength. "But you are the one who is blind." The humming grew louder. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling. The crystals in the chandeliers above us began to tinkle. Cling, cling, cling. "What is this?" Vance frowned, looking around. "What trickery?" "Valerius called me a lunar omega," I said. And then I let go of the tight knot of fear I had been holding in my chest for 20 years. Whoosh! A beam of pure, silver light exploded from my shoulder. It tore through the heavy velvet fabric of the dress as if it were paper. The light wasn't just bright. It was physical. It rushed upward, hitting the massive crystal chandelier above the throne. The light refracted through the crystals, painting the entire throne room in swirling patterns of silver and gold. The crowd screamed and covered their eyes. Elder Vance stumbled back, shielding his face. The warmth on my skin was gone. I felt expansive. I felt ancient. As the glare faded, leaving a soft, pulsing glow around me, I heard a gasp. I looked down. The birthmark on my shoulder was no longer just a mark. It was glowing through the torn fabric, bright as a star. Elder Vance was staring at it. His face had gone pale. His knees were shaking. "The crescent," he whispered, his voice trembling with terror and awe. "The mark of the moon." He looked up at me, and for the first time, he didn't see a servant. Slowly, painfully, the old wolf dropped to his knees. "Forgive us," he breathed, pressing his forehead to the cold stone floor. I looked back at Valerius. The king was smiling. The silence in the throne room was different now. Before, it had been a silence of judgment, of disdain. But now it was the silence of a held breath, the silence of a church before a miracle. I looked down at Elder Vance. The man who had just called me a genetic dead end was trembling on the marble floor, his forehead pressed against the stone in absolute submission. The silver light pulsing from my shoulder wasn't just visible. It was audible. A low, resonant thrum vibrated through my bones, like a tuning fork struck against crystal. It traveled down my arm, into my fingertips, making them tingle with an energy I had never felt before. For 20 years, I had felt empty, hollow. I thought it was because I lacked a wolf. I realized now, standing in the center of the dais, that I hadn't been empty. I had been a dam waiting to break. "Rise, Elder," Valerius said. His voice was calm, but there was a dark, satisfied edge to it. "You are embarrassing yourself." Vance scrambled up, looking pale and shaken. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the glowing mark on my shoulder, as if it were the sun itself. "The lunar gift," Vance whispered, addressing the crowd more than the king. "We thought it was a myth, a bedtime story." He looked at me, his eyes wide. Can you control it?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. My voice sounded strange, layered, resonant, as if another voice was speaking under mine. "It feels warm." It felt alive. My gaze drifted away from the elders, drawn by a pull I couldn't explain. It was like a string attached to my chest, tugging me toward the side of the room. I turned. Standing by a pillar was the captain of the guard, the same man who had looked at me with pity earlier. He was standing at attention, but his posture was rigid. He was favoring his left leg. I narrowed my eyes. Suddenly, the world shifted. I didn't see his armor or his uniform. I saw a web of red lines. Pain. I could see the old, jagged break in his femur, a war wound that had never healed properly. It glowed with a dull, throbbing heat that only I could see. "You're in pain," I said. The captain blinked, startled. "My lady?" "Your leg," I said, stepping off the dais. "Ilara?" Valerius called out softly, but he didn't stop me. I walked toward the captain. The crowd parted for me like water. No one dared to touch the woman glowing with silver fire. I stopped in front of the large soldier. Up close, the smell of his pain was sharp and metallic. "It hurts when it rains," I murmured, my hand hovering over his thigh. "It feels like grinding glass." The captain's stoic mask cracked. How? How could you know that?" "May I?" I asked. I didn't wait for an answer. The energy inside me was demanding release. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was a necessity. I placed my hand on his armored leg. The silver light flared. It wasn't a gentle glow this time. It was a rush. A torrent of white-hot power poured out of my palm, soaking through the metal plate, through the leather, and into the bone. The captain gasped, his back arching. "R! Hold him!" someone shouted. "No," Valerius commanded. "Let her work." I closed my eyes. In my mind's eye, I saw the bone knitting together. I saw the inflammation vanishing like steam. I saw the red lines of pain turning into cool, soothing blue. It felt like pouring water onto a parched plant. It felt right. The heat under my hand faded. The humming in my chest quieted to a soft purr. I pulled my hand back, swaying slightly. The drain was sudden and heavy. Valerius was there instantly, his hand on my waist to steady me. "Captain," Valerius said. "Walk." The captain looked terrified. He shifted his weight tentatively onto his left leg. He braced himself for the familiar stab of agony. It didn't come. His eyes widened. He stomped his boot on the marble. Clang. Nothing. No pain. No limp. He looked at me with an expression of pure shock. Then, tears welled in his eyes. "It's gone," he whispered. 10 years, and it's gone." He drew his sword. For a second, panic flared in my chest. But he didn't attack. He reversed the blade, holding the hilt toward me, and dropped to one knee. "My life is yours, my queen," he swore, his voice thick with emotion. A sound rippled through the grand hall. The sound of steel against stone. One by one, the other guards dropped to their knees. Then the nobles. Then the elders. Even Elder Vance, with trembling reverence, bowed his head. Valerius looked around the room, at the hundreds of powerful wolves kneeling before his broken mate. He looked down at me, pride radiating from him like heat from a sun. "I told you," he whispered in my ear, his lips brushing my temple. They would kneel. I looked at my hands. They were still glowing faintly. I wasn't the invisible servant girl anymore. I wasn't the scentless runt. I was the healer. I was the light in the shadow pack. But as the adrenaline faded, a new feeling washed over me. A wave of dizziness that had nothing to do with magic. "Valerius," I whispered, gripping his tunic. "I think I've got you," he said, scooping me up before my legs could give out. "Rest now," he commanded softly to the room at large. "The queen has given enough for one night." He carried me out of the silent, bowing hall, back toward the sanctuary of the royal wing. But as we crossed the threshold, I realized something. I wasn't fainting from exhaustion this time. I wasn't fainting from hunger. I was fainting because the magic had unlocked something else inside me. A scent. A realization. I pressed my nose against Valerius's neck, inhaling the deep, masculine scent of cedar and storm. And beneath it, something sweeter. Something that called to the blood I now knew was powerful. Valerius, I murmured against his skin as the darkness crept in. Yes, my love, I think I smell a pup. Valerius froze in the hallway. What did you say? But I couldn't answer. The dream took me, and for the first time, the dream was filled with the sound of tiny heartbeats. I woke to the sound of a heartbeat. It was steady, strong, a rhythmic thump-thump that I had grown used to over the last 24 hours. It was the sound of Valerius's heart beating against my ear as I lay resting on his chest. But then, I heard another sound, fainter, faster, a delicate flutter, like the wings of a hummingbird trapped in a cage. Swish, 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 swish. I blinked my eyes open. We were back in the royal suite. The shattered window had been repaired. The fire was dying down in the hearth, casting a soft, orange glow across the room. Outside, the moon was high and full, bathing the balcony in silver. I shifted slightly, and Valerius's arms tightened around me instantly. You're awake, he rumbled. His voice was rough with sleep, or perhaps with emotion. How long? I whispered. A few hours, he replied. The court has dispersed. The celebration has moved to the lower city. They are lighting bonfires in your honor, Alara. They are calling you the Silver Hand. I smiled against his chest. A better name than Runt. Valerius didn't smile. He pulled back slightly so he could look into my face. His golden eyes were searching, intense. Before you fell asleep, he said carefully, his hand moving to rest flat against my stomach. You said something. My breath hitched. I remembered. The scent. It hadn't been the roast chicken or the wine. It had been a scent of new milk and vanilla, faint but undeniable, radiating from my own skin. They told me I was barren, I whispered, the old fear creeping back in. Marcus, the healers in the village. They said my womb was cold, that because I had no wolf, I could carry no life. Valerius's hand was warm, so incredibly warm through the thin silk of the nightgown. They were wrong about your wolf, he murmured. They were wrong about your magic. He leaned down, pressing his ear to my stomach. He closed his eyes, his expression shifting into one of pure, unadulterated wonder. And they were wrong about this? He looked up at me, tears shimmering in his eyes. I can hear it, Alara. It is faint, but it is there. A second heartbeat, strong, fighting. A sob broke from my throat, not of sadness, but of relief so profound it felt like breaking chains. A pup? I asked. An heir, he corrected, fierce pride coloring his tone. A blend of shadow and light. A child born of the strongest magic this world has ever seen. I covered his hand with mine, pressing it deeper into my skin. We're going to have a family. We already have a family, he said. You and I. This. He patted my stomach gently. This is just the beginning of our legacy. Valerius sat up, pulling me with him. He wrapped the duvet around my shoulders and led me to the balcony doors. Come, he said. There is something you need to see. He opened the doors, and the cool night air washed over us. It smelled of pine and snow, but tonight it didn't make me shiver. I had my internal fire now. We stepped out onto the stone balcony, the same place where Marcus had met his justice just hours before. But the stain of that memory was gone, washed away by the moonlight. Below us, the shadow city sprawled out toward the mountains, and everywhere I looked, I saw lights, torches, bonfires, lanterns, thousands of them, flickering in the darkness. "Look," Valerius whispered, standing behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. "They are waiting for you." As if they sensed our presence, a roar went up from the city below. It started as a low rumble and grew into a deafening howl. Thousands of wolves, shifting and howling at the moon, honoring the new queen. A woo! The sound vibrated in my chest. It wasn't scary anymore. It was a song of belonging. I looked down at the hands resting on the stone railing. Yesterday, these hands had scrubbed floors. Yesterday, these hands had trembled holding a wine tray. Today, they glowed with the power to heal bone and sinew. Today, they cradled the future of the pack. "I was invisible," I whispered to the wind. "For so long, I was invisible." "I see you," Valerius said against my ear. "I have always seen you, Alara. I just didn't know where to look until you walked into my hall." He turned me around to face him. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, softening the alpha predator into a man in love. "You are my queen," he vowed. "My mate, my soul." I reached up, tracing the line of his jaw. "And you are my king," I replied. "My wolf, my home." Valerius leaned down, and when his lips met mine, it wasn't a devourer's kiss. It was a promise, a seal on a contract that no beta, no elder, and no law could ever break. I was Alara, the scentless runt, the kitchen maid, and I was the mother of the next generation. I closed my eyes, listening to the howls of my pack below and the 2 heartbeats beside me. Finally, after a lifetime of hiding in the shadows, I stepped into the light.